Welcome to Crypt Talk, where we take murder mysteries and give them an ASMR storytime vibe, complete with page turns and exaggerated voice inflections. Today's story is about an Iranian millionaire in her 30s who we'll call Zoe Engineer. Zoe Engineer and her husband are resting in bed in their affluent Seattle home when suddenly a man breaks through the window at 2 a.m. with a pew-pew. And before Zoe and her husband can even respond, the intruder unalives them both before turning the pew-pew on himself immediately afterwards. Now you might be wondering, who would commit such a senseless act of violence? Well, unfortunately, Zoe Engineer knew exactly who would do such a thing well before this incident occurred. In fact, she was so sure she actually filed a protection order against this man a week before the incident happened. In this protection order, she begged for the order to last 99 years because this man just could not stop harassing her. And she was certain he would never stop, mainly because he told her he would never stop. Now this man, we'll call him Ramen Monster. And Ramen Monster is also from Iran. Ramen Monster is a very lonely guy. This is because all of his relatives still live in Iran. But Ramen's ex-wife doesn't think Ramen Monster could possibly do anything crazy because she and Ramen share a daughter together. Additionally, Ramen Monster owns his own successful trucking company. But if there's anything I've learned in life, you should never underestimate a man's determination to be ungrateful for what he already has. To ease his depression, Ramen Monster starts listening to this podcast to pass the time as he's driving his 18-wheeler across the country. And Ramen Monster starts to become a big fan of this podcaster who releases podcast episodes in the language of Farsi, which is the language of Iran, apparently. Ramen Monster quickly becomes so enamored with this podcaster, he begins messaging her on a daily basis, and eventually the two become friends. Of course, if you haven't figured it out yet, the podcaster Ramen Monster worships is Zoe Engineer, none other. You see, Zoe Engineer, as you may have guessed, is a software engineer. And she maintains a podcast in which she gives advice on how to find employment in the tech industry. So she tries to keep her advice to Ramen strictly professional. But of course, Ramen Monster doesn't want just a friendship. He wants more. So Ramen Monster starts messaging Zoe Engineer dozens and dozens of times a day. His messaging becomes so frequent, Zoe Engineer wakes up to over 80 messages in one day. Ramen Monster, the emotional man that he is, even starts leaving voicemails of himself, crying and threatening to, how should I put this? Copy the superpowers of the Human Torch. And finally, during Christmas time, Ramen Monster leaves a bouquet of flowers on Zoe's front porch, prompting Zoe Engineer and her husband to contact the police. Zoe Engineer blocks all of her numbers and all of her social media accounts, and she informs Ramen Monster point blank that they cannot be friends anymore. This friendship breakup announcement obliterates Ramen Monster's self-worth. He starts parking down the street from Zoe's house. He reveals he found a way to record Zoe Engineer on her own phone. Like all psychopaths, Ramen Monster has no problem lying. He just has a problem with being lied to. So he creates all kinds of fake social media accounts. Every time Zoe Engineer thinks she's giving advice to a new client, it just happens to be Ramen Monster under a new name and a new fake photo. Ramen Monster even has the gall to tell her she's not allowed to have an Instagram anymore, unless it's only made private for him. Ramen Monster also starts contacting Zoe's neighbors for advice, just to establish his territory as her next partner. And Zoe's mom stays with Zoe Engineer in her home and spends every day peering out the window to be on the lookout for Ramen Monster. So anyways, the cops arrest Ramen Monster, lock him up for life, and celebrate by going out to the arcade for some skee-ball. Or do they? No, not at all. The police explain they can't serve the protection order because Ramen Monster is a trucker, and it's hard to locate his address. And, as you know, they never do end up serving that piece of paper which was supposedly gonna protect Zoe Engineer. And Zoe's mom ends up having to be the very person who must call 911 on the night Ramen Monster finally decides to act.